anyway, things like that. But yeah, in terms of what the robber barons did, the way they got big, assuming it was in the market, right? There were, and Folsom gets into this in his book, there were some people that went to the state to get special monopoly privileges or subsidies, but those who made their money in the market, yeah, they might have been jerks in their personal life, but the way they in business got ahead was they gave a better product at lower prices.
If you are, say, let's say John D. Rockefeller was immoral, you still, in the market, have to produce something of value. But between market entrepreneurs and political entrepreneurs, John D. Rockefeller, I thought, was very beneficial to society. David Rockefeller, I thought, was horrendous with his infiltrating the CFR and the Trilateral Commission and everything like that. So that really goes to show you, even if you're a bad person, to become powerful and wealthy in the marketplace, you have to create something that the masses really enjoy, whereas a powerful person, once they get hold of the state and they're immoral, well, that's when you get the Kissingers, the Ho Chi Minhs, the Maos, the Hitlers, and everyone. So if we do have these bad people, that doesn't justify a state at all. And if you're so worried about the inequality, or it's weird that he only cares about dollar amount inequality when one group of people has a monopoly on initiating violence. Also, he gets so many more readers than, say, you or I, or his TV appearances get so many more viewers. You and I value that. Shouldn't there be a redistribution scheme for those? The fact that he only applies this to the state and to money really shows you that it's not really a conscience that the liberal has. I think it's more of a lust for power, as you were saying earlier.
Right, I agree. And other people have done like reductio ad absurdums. I think there's plenty areas of life where there's inequities, and yet most people, thank goodness, shy away from trying to apply the logic of redistribution in those other areas, right? And so, and again, I'm glad they do that, because I wouldn't want them to be consistent and apply those, the horrible idea of forcing people to redistribute in these other areas of life. But yeah, you're right that it's odd that it's only applied in certain areas, and conveniently, it's always in areas where it gives the state more power.
He goes on in chapter 2 to talk about the origins of the welfare state, which I originally learned from Tom Palmer in his book, After the Welfare State. But he says on page 33, as early as 1881, Bismarck described the rationale for what we would now call a welfare state, which he saw as a way to pacify the lower classes and secure the Kaiser's rule. I think this is what LBJ said when he's quoted in the book Inside the White House, saying, I'll have those N-words voting Democrat the next 200 years, that when people ultimately see the illegitimacy of political authority and coercion, even if they see it, if they're dependent on it, they're much less likely to see it in the first place, and they're much less likely to say, you know what, we need to resist this thing. So I thought that was interesting that he mentioned the origins of the welfare state being totally rather conspiratorial, and it's the same welfare state he promotes today.
Yeah, I'm glad you highlighted that passage. I had marked it up in my copy as well, that it was amazing to me that Krugman didn't at least acknowledge and say something, because he could have covered himself. He could have said something like, of course, I think that Franklin Roosevelt did the same, his policies for noble reasons, and, from our vantage point today, these are good programs, and I support them, and they're good for the social welfare, even though Bismarck may have had ulterior motives in mind. He could have said something like that, but he didn't even, so I don't know. Did it not even occur to him, or did he think, well, I don't want to mislead, I might lose some readers if I mention that. Let me just be quiet about that. I honestly don't know. But yeah, it was amazing to me that he so casually mentioned how the welfare state's origins were clearly designed not to help the recipients, but to keep them down, to keep them subservient to the state. And Krugman just, anyway.
Yeah, Hans Hermann Hoppe in The Theory of Socialism and Capitalism talks about the best socialist capitalist experiment was Germany being split up after the Second World War. Or chapter 6, where he talks about Milton Friedman, the Chicago school versus the Keynesian school. The left has like thousands of ideas on how to violently redistribute wealth, but the fact that they don't focus on wealth creation and being the foundation of society. The fact that they never talk about how it's created in the first place, why some countries are wealthier than others, makes me question the sincerity behind their claims. So the question is, what makes some countries wealthy and some countries poor in the Austrian view?
Well, I'm sure, you know, any particular Austrian might have different emphases, but I mean, the main thing is, you know, rule of law, respect for property rights, and I suppose nowadays people might stress more the with the work of Deidre McCloskey, the let's say the culture, and I don't mean anything in, you know, I don't mean like in terms of culture wars or something in the U.S. context. I just mean like in some societies historically, they may have had a very efficient, non-corrupt administrative state that, you know, sort of neutrally enforced property title transfers. But if that society, you know, looked down with disdain on merchants as like dirty, you know, dabblers in commerce, and like no respectable family would want their son to grow up to be a shopkeeper, but would want their son to go into government service, and that was the noble thing. You know, you could see how that kind of a place would not be as commercially successful and have as rapid economic growth as some other place where they really, you know, championed the entrepreneur. So the crucial thing to me, as I say, is respect for property rights. We might call economic freedom. You know, limited government. They can't debase the currency. They can't just arbitrarily take your wealth. Rule of law, things like that. And then on top of that, if you want to really get icing on the cake, if the culture is generally supportive of voluntary commercial relations, that's the kind of society that's going to grow rich. Ultimately, in terms of the mechanics of it, you know, Mises always stressed that it's the, you know, investments capital per worker, right? The reason U.S. workers right now can produce so much per year, I mean, partly it's their education, but as we were mentioning earlier, the U.S. education system is not too great. Really what it is that they're working with more tools and equipment than people like in Bangladesh. Or the reason that American workers in 2018 are so much more productive than American workers in 1918 were is because today they're working with so much more, you know, some, you know, tools and equipment that augments the productivity of their bare hands. So that's why we can produce so much, and that's why we can consume so much.
Yeah, I really realized that one day our computers software went down, and instead of doing like 100 orders that my work does in a day, I think we did like 5 or 6. We were so much less productive because of the capital investment in equipment. So each one of us, we're doing everything by hand. So that really showed me, like in real world terms, wow, this is why some countries are rich and some countries are poor. So
I entirely disagree that the absolute standard of living is higher in Krugman's world than it would be under pure laissez-faire, but it is possible. I mean, things like, you know, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, and, you know, these classic examples we point to, these entrepreneurs who form new companies to entirely new product lines or services that people hadn't dreamed of, and they become billionaires. Yeah, you want a system that allows that kind of a person to do that. So it's true, oh gee, now, you know, there's a billionaire and he has a lot more money than the middle class, but now everybody in the middle class, you know, has the internet, or they have Walmart or whatever, you know what I mean? So to me, if what we're concerned about is the actual standard of living of as many people as possible, particularly the most vulnerable, then yeah, you don't want to have a powerful state. You want to have laissez-faire.
Yeah, and I can definitely see how larger companies are able to deal with the costs of higher taxes, of higher regulations. When you increase the barriers to entry, only the wealthier companies have the the lawyers and the resources to do these things. So it sort of cuts off their competition, and that could definitely be a source of inequality. The fact that it's so much harder to compete with people that are wealthier. He also doesn't say or explain why liberals are really worried about wealth inequality that has been voluntarily accumulated, but they're so okay with a majority of 535 congressmen coercively controlling 330 Americans. How is that not unequal? The fact that he can't see that, I mean, come on, man.